Most people think disrespect begins with an insult. It doesn't. It begins the moment someone decides your reaction is predictable. The words are almost irrelevant. A laugh that lingers 1 second too long. A meeting where your sentence never reaches the end. A message left unanswered while everyone else's receives an immediate reply. None of these moments seem important alone, yet together they reveal something most people never notice. Human beings are constantly measuring one another, not with rulers, with reactions. Every expression, every hesitation, every apology becomes data. The tragedy is that most people believe respect is something generous people eventually receive. History suggests something different. Respect often follows those whose boundaries are impossible to misunderstand. Niccolò Machiavelli spent his life observing courts where kingdoms rose and collapsed because rulers misunderstood one invisible law. People rarely test your strength first. They test your limits. Once your limits become flexible, your position quietly begins to disappear. This is why the loudest conflicts rarely begin with loud actions. They begin with tolerated patterns. One ignored interruption becomes 5. One dismissed opinion becomes permanent exclusion. One unnecessary apology becomes an expectation. By the time most people realize they are no longer respected, the verdict was delivered long ago through hundreds of silent moments nobody else even noticed. The uncomfortable truth is that disrespect is often less about hostility than observation. Someone wants to know what happens when they push. Your response becomes the answer they remember. The question is never whether people will evaluate you. They always will. The real question is what conclusion they reach after watching you under pressure. And once you understand the hidden language behind those moments, you stop seeing disrespect as an emotional wound. You begin seeing it as information. That single shift changes every relationship you will ever have. Because the strongest position in any room rarely belongs to the loudest person. It belongs to the one who understands the game before everyone else realizes they are playing it. Number 1. The first battle is never about words. The greatest misunderstanding about disrespect is believing it starts with language. It almost never does. Long before anyone openly challenges you, they study something much quieter. They study your tolerance. Every environment has invisible negotiations happening beneath ordinary conversation. Offices, families, friendships, business partnerships, even social media. People observe who apologizes too quickly, who laughs after being dismissed, who explains themselves without being asked. These behaviors look harmless because society teaches that accommodation creates harmony. Yet psychology reveals another pattern. Predictable accommodation often encourages additional testing. Not because people are evil, because human beings instinctively search for certainty. Imagine 2 managers entering the same boardroom. One immediately begins defending every decision before anyone questions it. The other listens first, speaks only when necessary, never rushes to justify. Employees unconsciously assign different levels of authority before either manager has demonstrated superior competence. Confidence is often interpreted through economy. The fewer unnecessary reactions someone displays, the more observers assume hidden capability. Machiavelli repeatedly described appearances as political currency because perception shapes expectation long before evidence appears. Once people believe your emotional state can be controlled externally, every interaction becomes another experiment. They interrupt to measure patience. They dismiss ideas to measure confidence. They delay responses to measure need. Most people fail these invisible examinations because they think every challenge deserves immediate correction. Ironically, constant self-defense often creates the opposite impression. It signals that outside approval remains emotionally expensive. The strongest negotiators understand something different. Every unnecessary explanation transfers leverage away from the speaker. They answer questions without pleading for agreement. They disagree without performing outrage. They allow silence to carry meaning when words would only reduce it. Modern leadership research repeatedly finds that perceived authority depends less on volume than behavioral consistency during uncertainty. When markets collapse, investors watch executives. When a crisis unfolds, citizens watch leaders. When tension enters a relationship, everyone watches whoever appears least controlled by emotion. The lesson is uncomfortable because it rejects popular advice about always proving yourself. The world rarely remembers the person who explained the longest. It remembers the person who remained centered while everyone else rushed to be understood. And once you realize people evaluate reactions before arguments, another question becomes unavoidable. If restraint changes how others perceive you, what happens when restraint becomes your reputation instead of an occasional decision? Number 2, reputation is built before you enter the room. Most people believe reputation follows action. In reality, reputation often arrives first and shapes how every future action will be interpreted. Walk into any organization and notice something fascinating. Certain people are interrupted constantly. Others finish every sentence without asking for attention. The difference is not always intelligence. Sometimes it is expectation accumulated over hundreds of previous encounters. Human beings conserve mental energy by predicting behavior. Once they categorize someone as uncertain, accommodating, impulsive, or composed, future interactions become filtered through that assumption. This is why changing your life often requires changing patterns before changing outcomes. Consider 2 entrepreneurs presenting identical ideas to investors. One apologizes before beginning. The other acknowledges risks without apologizing for existing. The proposal remains identical. Yet confidence changes the emotional atmosphere of the room. Research in social cognition suggests first impressions become surprisingly resistant to contradiction because the brain prefers consistency over constant reevaluation. Machiavelli observed the same phenomenon centuries earlier through politics instead of neuroscience. Leaders who repeatedly projected composure during uncertainty eventually gained influence beyond their actual resources because expectation itself became power. The opposite also happens. Someone who repeatedly accepts dismissive treatment gradually teaches observers to expect accessibility without consequence. Over time, even well-intentioned people begin interacting with them differently without consciously realizing why. This is how reputation quietly compounds, not through dramatic confrontations, through ordinary repetitions invisible to everyone except those paying attention. Think about the individuals whose presence immediately changes the atmosphere of a meeting. They rarely demand respect aloud. They simply behave as though attention is valuable and time cannot be wasted. Their calendar reflects priorities. Their words arrive without hurry. Their decisions rarely require theatrical explanation. None of these habits guarantee authority. Together, they communicate internal stability. And stability is magnetic because uncertainty dominates modern life. The deeper insight is that reputation cannot be manufactured through performance alone. People eventually detect inconsistency. A composed voice cannot hide desperate decisions forever. Lasting credibility emerges when external behavior consistently reflects internal discipline. That is why the most respected people often appear surprisingly ordinary until pressure arrives. Only then does everyone notice they move differently. While others chase immediate emotional victory, they protect long-term position instead, because they understand something timeless. Every interaction leaves behind a memory. Every memory contributes to expectation, and expectation quietly becomes the invisible architecture of power. In the next part, we examine the moment most people lose that architecture without even realizing it. It happens not during conflict itself, but in the seconds immediately after it begins. Number 3, the calmest person usually controls the outcome. Most people think power belongs to whoever speaks first. Reality is often the opposite. The first emotional reaction usually gives away the most information. The moment someone feels ignored, criticized, or challenged, the instinct is immediate. Defend yourself. Correct the misunderstanding. Win the exchange. But every rushed reaction tells observers exactly where your emotional leverage lives. The person who can predict your reaction can often predict your decisions. That is why experienced negotiators rarely rush to fill uncomfortable silence. They understand that silence is not empty. It is diagnostic. It reveals who needs certainty the fastest. Imagine a salary negotiation. One candidate begins explaining why they deserve the promotion before the employer asks a single difficult question. Another answers carefully, pauses after each response, and waits. The room changes. The employer now carries part of the conversational weight. Neither candidate has said anything extraordinary, yet one appears to be seeking validation, while the other appears to be evaluating the opportunity itself. The same principle appears in politics. During public debates, the most memorable moments are rarely the loudest arguments. They are often the measured pauses before a response. Those few seconds communicate confidence under pressure. Viewers instinctively associate emotional control with competence, even when they disagree with the speaker's position. This is not about pretending to be mysterious. It is about refusing to let someone else's emotions determine your rhythm. A delayed response is not avoidance. It is evidence that your thinking process cannot be rushed by external pressure. Machiavelli repeatedly emphasized that leaders who allowed emotion to dictate action often surrendered advantages they did not realize they possessed. Impulsive decisions satisfy the present moment but frequently weaken the future position. Calm, by contrast, creates options, and options are where influence begins. Modern psychology reaches a similar conclusion. Under stress, the brain narrows its field of attention. It becomes reactive rather than strategic. People who develop the habit of pausing interrupt that automatic process. They move from instinct to observation. They notice details others miss. They hear what was implied rather than merely what was said. That difference changes conversations. It changes negotiations. It changes relationships. Over time, observers begin associating your presence with steadiness instead of volatility. They stop expecting emotional outbursts because they have never seen them rewarded. This does not guarantee agreement. It creates something more valuable: predictable composure. And predictable composure quietly reshapes how every future disagreement begins. Because once people realize they cannot control your emotional tempo, they are forced to confront the quality of their own arguments instead. Number 4. Boundaries quietly reveal character. There is a reason boundaries make certain people uncomfortable. They remove ambiguity. The moment a clear limit exists, everyone involved must reveal who they really are. Some people adjust without resistance because mutual respect was already part of their character. Others immediately negotiate, challenge, or ignore the limit because they benefited from its absence. That reaction is often more informative than the original conflict. Most individuals assume boundaries exist to change other people's behavior. In reality, their greatest value lies elsewhere. They expose compatibility. Consider two business partners. One repeatedly schedules meetings at the last minute, expecting everyone to adapt. Eventually, the other partner explains that future meetings require advance notice. A respectful colleague adapts. An entitled colleague argues. The same boundary produces two completely different responses. Suddenly, the issue is no longer scheduling. It is values. Healthy relationships do not eliminate disagreement. They make disagreement easier to navigate because expectations are visible rather than assumed. The absence of boundaries creates temporary comfort but long-term confusion. Nobody knows where the line exists until someone finally reaches a breaking point. That is why emotional explosions often surprise everyone except the person who has been silently accumulating frustration for months. Machiavelli understood that stable systems require clear rules. Kingdoms collapse when enforcement becomes inconsistent. Organizations weaken when standards apply only sometimes. The same principle quietly governs everyday relationships. If your principles change according to convenience, people stop trusting the principles themselves. They begin negotiating every exception because history suggests exceptions are always possible. Consistency does not require rigidity. It requires clarity. Saying no to one opportunity often protects 10 better ones that have not yet appeared. Declining unnecessary conflict preserves energy for meaningful conflict. Refusing to overcommit protects the quality of commitments that truly matter. These decisions rarely feel dramatic in the moment. Their consequences accumulate slowly, shaping the reputation others experience long before they consciously recognize it. Over months and years, boundaries become more than personal preferences. They become evidence of self-leadership. And self-leadership influences every environment because people instinctively look for individuals whose actions remain aligned with their principles, even when convenience points in another direction. Eventually, something remarkable happens. You spend less time convincing others to respect your limits because the right people recognize them immediately, while the wrong people reveal themselves before they gain meaningful access to your trust. That realization leads to the deepest lesson of all. Once you stop treating difficult encounters as personal attacks and start treating them as information, every challenge becomes a window into human nature rather than a wound to your identity.